So joining me today is Tom Coleman, a Mayo man. He's primarily now a sleep coach and I think has a big interest in recovery and nutrition side of things as well. And he's worked with a lot of elite level athletes as well as high performers in the corporate space and various teams across rugby, hockey, GAA, inter-county teams as well on how to improve sleep quality and recovery. So Tom, first of all, thanks a million for coming on. How are you keeping?
Very good, Kevin. Thanks for having me. It's always good to connect.
No, it's brilliant, and it's a really interesting topic. I think every player and coach who's listening will have a huge interest in this side of things, and I think with the introduction of Whoop and different tech wearables like that in the last number of years, I think a lot of athletes now, even at club level, realise the importance of this side of things. So we'll dig into all that, and I'm looking forward to getting your insights around that. But first of all, can you just give us a bit of background on yourself, talk about how your interest started, and then maybe some of the athletes and teams that you've worked with over the last
Sure.
number of years?
So I suppose, look, I qualified in health science and physiology about 17 years ago. It feels weird saying that, and, I was always had a question in mind. I set up a nutritional consultancy business about 13 years ago now, I think it was, because 13 years ago, nutrition was the big thing. It was the magic bullet, it was the key that people were looking for. And I was very interested in nutrition and I wanted to make it accessible for people and I wanted to make it make it useful in their life, make it practical. And it was all around recovery, right? Now, what I found out pretty early was a lot of the high performing individuals and teams will actually seek out sort of new or novel things first. So it was like a lovely surprise for me because I thought it worked in a linear fashion. You started down here and you gradually worked your way up. But actually, I got to work with some fairly high performing teams pretty early on. And from that, I kind of realized it was all about accelerating recovery because the science around strength and conditioning and the volume and all that kind of stuff, all the training loads, all that stuff is fairly well sorted out. Really, the question I asked was, how can I accelerate recovery? My job was to get the athlete to show up to training or the game at 100%. And I remember just digging into everything, like looking at psychology, looking at all these different attributes, skill acquisition, everything. And I listened to a guy in a podcast from Australia and he talked about sleep being the ultimate, and that just blew my mind. And I delved deep into the sleep and that was 10 years ago. Now you mentioned Whoop there. So from that, it was one night actually, and I just remember spending about 6 hours going down a rabbit hole and it didn't stop then. And I actually contacted a company in the US called Fatigue Science, and they adapted US military tech that they had, it was developed for fighter pilots to measure mental fatigue. So it gave the user a reading out of 100, a score, and it was a predictive model, meaning you could slide it forward and see what your alertness levels were going to be like in 6, 8, 10 hours. So I contacted that company and over the course of a few months built a relationship and I convinced them to send me over 5 units. And these units were about $1,000 each at the time. And from that then I started to analyze the sleep patterns of elite athletes. I learned a lot about sleep and recovery and all of the different, there's not one attribute of sports performance that sleep doesn't impact. And even yet today I really think that it's the most underutilized. It's where the numbers are. It's where those margins can be gained. Now, I spoke to a very high level selector on from one of the top hurling counties in Ireland, right? Top 3. And he said to me, oh yeah, he said, it's all about those little 1 or 2 percentages. And I said, when I talked about sleep, I said, you're missing it. I said, you're missing the whole point. I said, sleep is the foundation that everything else is built upon because it impacts your food, your nutrition, your ability to make decisions, your reaction times, your shot accuracy, all of that. I said, if the sleep isn't right, everything else suffers. And I still feel today it's like that. So I got to work with people like Jamie Heaslip on a one-to-one basis and I monitored his sleep when he was still playing at the highest level. I worked with Munster Academy, done talks for them, Ulster Academy, Connacht Academy, and Senior on all of those. I worked with Roscommon Senior Inter-County team for a year. I worked with people who've competed at Olympics. I've worked with world champions. I've worked with weightlifters. I've worked with Irish dancers. Rather infamously, I worked with John Kavanagh and Conor McGregor. I was his personal sleep coach for about 3 months. So I've been through a lot of different sports, and the goal is the same. Let's dovetail and our training programs and everything, to get the maximum out of the athletes, so that ultimately they're showing up to the training field or to perform just at the very top. They're not at 90% or 80%. They're at 100% when they rock up. And I think there's a lot there for us to still go with that.
So that's a brilliant synopsis of the athletes and the teams that you work with, Tom. Just as a kind of this is a very basic question, but I've heard it described as the best legal performance enhancer, sleep, in terms of playing sport. Why is it that it's such a game changer for athletes? How does it actually, without going too deep into the science, how does it actually help them perform better?
I suppose we look at sleep on its basic level and what happens. And there's a lot of physiological repair. Like, it's an active phase of recovery. We don't just switch off, right? Sleep, even from a human perspective, is an active phase of recovery. Your brain, your mind, your body, your conscious, your subconscious, they all switch into this inactivity in one sense, but actually there's so much going on beneath the surface. If you think about a car, you're not going to fix the car while you're still driving it. Okay, an ideal time to drive it when it's sitting in the garage, right? So we're in a dormant state. So actually it's an ideal time. So if we look at something like growth hormone, like, you talk to rugby guys about growth hormone and their ears prick up, like, how can I gain more muscle, right? And all these guys online talking about how the protein shakes and how this product and how this is, and I'm building muscle, and you're not at all, actually. 75% of growth hormone that's secreted over 24 hours is secreted in slow wave sleep. And that's stage one in the first 2 90-minute sleep cycles. Primarily, that's when the vast majority of growth hormone. So that's when the muscles are repairing, the tissues are repairing, the nerve tissues as well as the muscular tissues as well as the soft tissues as well, all of that. You're dormant and the growth hormone is being flooded into your bloodstream, and all of that repair is happening. Your hormones, talk about testosterone, for guys and estrogen, look, we can delve into them all, but your T levels need sleep. Your endocrine system balances out. If you get less than 5 hours sleep a night, your testosterone levels for the next day drop hugely. That's going to impact so much. So all of this physical repair, you deal with high performance, and one of the big things for athletes is overtraining. One of the big things for athletes is getting sick. They're like thoroughbred racehorses, right? So inflammation is mediated. Now, we want a certain level of inflammation because within stages of repair in the body, there's 3 stages of muscle repair, essentially. Stage 1 is inflammation. So we want a certain amount of inflammation that signals to the body, fix the muscle fibers, knit them together and heal, rebuilding, right? So we need a certain amount of it. If we don't get enough sleep, that we won't get enough of it, or we'll get an overreactive system and we'll break down and we'll get sick. So those are the physical repairs that happen primarily in the first half of the night, I would say, because when you sleep in cycles of 90 minutes. So 5 90-minute cycles is 7.5 hours. Now, during the latter cycles, all of the brain function is clearing, cleaning, distributing nutrients, embedding positive emotional experiences. And so one of the first places you will see mental fatigue, like you've seen it in the game 1,000 times. The guy jumps up, catches the ball, turns, beats the man. He's right in front of goal. There's 3 lads coming at him, and all he has to do is just do a simple hand pass to a lad 5 yards away, and it's a certain goal. And what does he do? He skies the ball and screws it wide. Decision making, all of that stuff is dependent upon sleep. So let's just briefly look at, I'm going to quote you now, some of the science around it. With me saying it, it's not me saying it here. Famously, there was a group of collegiate basketball players. So they were tested. They were given 6 hours sleep versus 8 hours sleep versus 10 hours sleep. This is from Stanford University. Look up the study, 2011. I think it's called May et al. So you're looking at 9% in shot accuracy. Now, being a Mayo man, right, and looking at Gaelic football, how many times have we lost by the finest of margins, by that 1%, by that 1 point, one kick of the game? You know, the culture needs to change within GAA. The culture needs to change insofar as like train hard, work hard. How many Gaelic players out there have been told to sleep better, to improve their sleep quality, sleep harder, sleep better? What are you doing to look after your sleep? It's not happening. So it's not just shot accuracy. It's sprint times. It's free throws. It's fatigue levels, perceived level of exertion. There's another famous study from 2017. They looked at the amount of sleep, muscle glycogen, and so your energy levels, basically, your explosiveness, your performance, your decision making, your reaction time, all of those were looked at in that study. That was by Simpson et al. In 2017, athletes, and there was huge differences there. There's any amount of data now, and like in the US, they really take it very seriously. So I was lucky enough to work with the guys in fatigue science. At the time, they were working with the Chicago Cubs, and the year after they started working with them, they won the World Series for the first time in 105 years. They also worked with the Seattle Seahawks. They also won the Super Bowl the year after, because the focus shifted from work and performance, and everyone okay, take out the talent piece, so what are they doing differently to win? Well, they're focusing on the recovery, because they're pretty much doing the same level, intensity and volume of training. So where are the gains to him? Now, you ask any lad that walks in the door, how'd you sleep last night? No one's going to turn around and say, no, it was brutal. I was up scrolling half the night. So I feel like the first team that really takes that seriously and starts to, because if we can measure it, we can improve it. Okay. Now, I will also caveat that by saying that needs to be done independently, because if you're one of those people which are whoop, the efficacy of the data, how accurate it is, well, I know how accurate it is and how inaccurate it can be. And I also know from research the impact that can have on the mind of the person. I have to hit my sleep target, so I got him down 66%. Jesus, I thought I had a good night's sleep last night. So focus on process. Results come. Stop focusing on what the whoop is telling you. Especially if you're a type A personality. And look, a lot of those high performers, they tend to be, I do the A, I get B, every time. They tend to be OCD. I have to do it this way. And that, if you become obsessive about sleep, it's going to elude you. You're going to lose it.
Yeah, there's a lot in that. And first of all, I think I was listening to a podcast there recently. I think it was the CEO of Whoop was talking with Chris Williamson, and he mentioned that they're potentially bringing in a new setting so you can switch off the ability to check your sleep from the night before if it's coming up to a game or things like that. Because I remember the Tyrone footballer Conor Myler talking about refusing to check it the morning of a game of an All-Ireland final, because the impact that could have in your head. You wake up refreshed, think I had a great night's sleep, I'm ready to play this game, and you look at that Whoop and it says you had 70% recovery, wherever it is, and then all of a sudden that affects you as well mentally. So there is a kind of a, I don't know if it's a placebo is the right expression, but there is a way it can affect you even if your sleep wasn't optimal. Just before we kind of dig into all that side of things, is there, what's the link? I work as an S&C coach, and I'm preaching to players. Players will ask me about what supplements can I take and all this kind of thing. And as you said, sleep is really the biggest improvement you can make in your performance. But between sleep and getting injured, is there a massive link? And then also sleep and say a player that wants to get leaner, does that affect how your body can reduce fat as well? I know that's two kind of different things I've asked there, but what can you talk about just the link with those?
Yeah, sure. So I want people to look up a guy called Jan Lamar. So Jan Lamar is the guy who studied injury risk profile and sleep. And I can tell you now, without looking at the data, the difference between getting 6 hours and getting 8 hours sleep is you are 1.7 times more likely to be injured over the course of 18 months from his research. So Jan Lamar has done a lot of work in this. If you talk about longevity in sport, again, look at sleep and look at the work he's done there. So Jan Lamar is the guy. Essentially, you will be less likely to injure if you are getting enough sleep. Because why? Because all of the systems are getting a chance to properly heal and properly recover. So that's the first part. I mean, when is the healing happening? When is the recovery happening from injury? The vast majority is happening at night. Now, there are certain things you can do, and you can dovetail the nutrition with the sleep. And and that's why, I mean, I was lucky, I was privy to some of the stuff that the Chicago Cubs were doing. If you understand the physiology and circadian rhythms, which I do, you can actually dovetail the nutrition with the sleep to get the maximum, you can provide all of the things, all of the building blocks and things like that will help. In regard to body composition, so if you're not getting enough sleep, your cortisol levels are likely to be higher. If you're waking up, you're going to be. Why do people wake up? There's many reasons. One of those reasons is nighttime secretion of cortisol. Now, if you've got cortisol floating around the system, energy that comes in, you're in a stressed out state. So it's going to be stored as fat. It's going to be more likely stored as fat than it is if you're, and they've done tests on feeding the exact same amount of calories during the day and at night. And, there is a great difference. So if you look at body composition, you're looking at fat storage and you're looking at muscle building. And I would say that muscle building is more hormonal signaling and providing the right building blocks and nutrients and vitamins at the right time. So if you're not getting the sleep, you're not building the muscle, your human growth hormone levels are going to be down, your T levels are going to be down. So that's going to impact the muscle growth. And also you're going to have elevated levels of cortisol and you're going to be more likely to store fat.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I want to jump into some strategies that players can take and use themselves. And I guess one area that a lot of players would talk about is, say, the night before a game, a big game in particular, you're going to have those jitters. You are thinking about the game a lot more, and you're lying in bed. You realise how important it is that you get a good night's sleep, but you're finding it hard, the excitement, the adrenaline running through your body, you're finding it hard to get to sleep. Yeah. Why does that make sleep difficult? And then secondly, what can a player do about that if that's something that is affecting them the night before a big game?
Yeah. So look, this is common. When I worked with Connacht rugby lads and the Ulster rugby lads and all those lads, and sometimes you're traveling as well, maybe, and that's another conversation. But the anticipatory anxiety, the excitement, it is there. What I would say to those guys, what I'd say to you guys is, look, you give yourself a free pass, right? Because you have spent months training. Right. So your skill acquisition and where you seek that information in your brain when you're doing it on the field, right, is not going to be lost from a bad night's sleep. It's not. Absolutely. So all of the skill stuff is not going to be lost. You've done the strength and conditioning, your fitness levels, So when I analysed fatigue of professional athletes, I wouldn't even get a reading without having 3 days worth of data. And when I was analysing fatigue overall, I would look at 7 days worth of data. So you kind of have a free pass, you kind of have the night before, just allow yourself to say, right, I probably won't sleep tonight. That's grand. I'm not going to lose, I'm not going to lose that much by missing out on some sleep tonight. So give yourself a free pass. And often when you give up, that's when you actually, you can, I suppose it takes practice. Now, the biggest thing is something in psychology called cueing control. I do this, I get that result. The better trained you are in winding yourself down, which includes the mind, and that's why, people have their habits, their routines and all that, I do this and I do that and I do this and I do that and boom, I get that result 99% of the time anyway, So building a good routine, I would say to you, learn to control the racing mind. And there are techniques that I work with people. So for example, when I was working with fatigue science, they would send me over literature from the Walter Reed Institute, and that is the military wing, the education. And I learned what elite soldiers do in highly stressful environments. And what they train soldiers, because if they make a bad decision, it's not a game, it's their life, right? So they would jump into cold water and do mental tasks while in cold water. Because when you go into cold water, you go into fight or flight, what happens is your ability to think falls off a cliff. Your ability to think goes down by up to 80%. that's huge. So if you can train that, and you can train that. So they would train their cognition. I think people feel powerless when they're lying in bed at night and, I can't sleep and my mind is racing. Well, that takes time to train, my friend, but guess what? You can train that. You can train yourself to switch off and ramp down. And that's what the best people can do. Not because they're good at it, because they've trained themselves to do that. So I would say to you, you have a free pass, focus on relaxation, not sleep. Focus on relaxation. Learn some body scan techniques. Learn some techniques to calm the body, calm the mind, keep in the present moment. And then the sleep will come. We move the barriers out of the way and the sleep happens by itself. But, you're fine. And don't look at the whoops, because I can tell you now, there's a principle in science called VARC. Validity is a measure of how accurate something is, and reliability is a measure of how consistent it is. So, any device in science needs to be valid and reliable. So the device I worked with was 94% accurate. And before people go looking it up, you cannot get them. They will only be issued to groups through people like me who work with elite groups. So you cannot get them individually. But if a group is interested, I can get them, and they're now a much more reasonable cost, right? But the device I used was validated against the gold standard, and it was 94% accurate. Whoops, Fitbits and other devices are 80 to 90% accurate when telling you if you're awake or asleep. The accuracy level drops down to 50 or 60% when analysing deep sleep or light sleep, depending on the individual. So you could be looking at a figure which is completely wrong, and you could have slept very well. So don't become obsessive with the finer level detail unless you're absolutely sure that the device you have is giving you the correct figures.
Yeah, and just on Whoop then, like HRV is obviously a big thing that they use to tell your recovery or how well you've slept or recovered. Is that, how accurate is that then, or is HRV the be all and end all when it comes to assessing how you did sleep?
I would say that HRV is your ability to switch on and switch off between systems. It's essentially your nervous system in your heart, the electrical system that changes the heart rate the variability between beats. So when I breathe in, my heart rate goes up, and when I breathe out, my heart rate goes down. Very slightly, but we can measure it, right? So essentially, it's like there is something called the window of tolerance in stress. Okay? It's also known as vagal tone, maybe. So the example I use, so if I get up this morning, my stress level should be down here. And then I start driving into work and somebody cuts me off and the stress levels start going up, and I get into work and and then people are not responding, and I'm getting, I could be up here. I have to be able to pull that down. Now, heart rate variability is my ability to switch between I'm in a calm state and then I'm laser focused. Really, that's what heart rate variability is about. So the athletes ideally should have high heart rate variability. But again, I would question, because Whoop measure it differently. Whoops measure it differently to Apple Watch. So again, I would look at exercises to maybe improve my heart rate variability. Think about it. That's what the elite soldiers were doing. They were training their ability to remain calm, even though all hell is breaking loose around them. To be very physically switched on and mentally not to be too emotional, and to be able to make calculated decisions under high amounts of stress. As an athlete, you can train yourself to do that. I tried to do that years ago, and people thought I was off my head, because I wanted to throw people in dice baths and start drilling them with questions and giving them, geez, what are you doing that for? But I knew what I was doing. But I would say you can train it. But again, don't rely on the reading so much as have a look at how you can train your HRV.
One of the biggest reasons I wanted to get you on was because you have an expertise in sleep and recovery, but then also nutrition. And like, two of the biggest things that players are told from a nutrition point of view is obviously hydrate yourself really well, and then after if you play a game, whatever, you have to eat to help the body recover and to restore the kind of the energy expenditure. But two questions I would often have from the players I would coach would be, is there a time you should stop drinking water? So you don't have to wake up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet. And then the second question would be, when is too late to eat? And what's the trade-off between I need to eat after a training session, even if it's 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night to recover, versus is that affecting my sleep in terms of digestion and all that kind of thing?
Okay, so let's try and remember those firstly.
Yeah.
Okay, hydration. So hydration is important. If you're below 2% loss, then there's going to be consequences, right? And I've done this I've done this with a group of players. You can actually do this with a weighing scale. You can measure how much water someone loses by measuring how much they weigh, how much they drink during the training, and weigh them after. Make sure there's not rain and we haven't got wet gear, right? Now, within a group, within a cohort, within a bunch of 20 lads, 18 or 19 of them might be all right. There might be one guy who's losing weight a lot, on his performance levels. So it is important. Actually, if you could get it spot on, you'd have a guy walking onto the pitch at 100% hydrated. And you'd want to keep him hydrated during the game. And then you'd want him losing hydration. Water weighs 1 kilo per litre. So if you're a big guy, you could be a couple of kilos down, So actually, you actually want him kind of dehydrating right at the end of the game, if you were to be really particular about it. But I would, I'd sort of say, look, usually, see, it depends on your training volume and when you're training too. Because like for a normal person, you tell them, try not to take on too much fluids after about 6 p.m., 4 to 6 p.m., right? Leave that kind of 4 or 5 hour window before sleep. Now, it does depend on the type of guy you are. Maybe you don't get up in the middle of the night and whatever. Or maybe you're the type that does. So, like, you kind of know yourself. Cut out the caffeine, right, guys? Caffeine. So that's a diuretic. That's going to make you pee. That's going to dehydrate you. You want caffeine going onto that pitch, but you don't want copious mental amounts of it. Stop energy drinks out the window. Forget about it. There's nothing that you cannot reproduce in making your own energy. You can make a way better energy drink yourself, right? So the caffeine is important. It will impact your sleep, not just your ability to fall asleep, how deep you go in deep sleep. Caffeine has a half-life of 8 hours, meaning 50% of it is eliminated. So if I have a big, strong cup of coffee at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that's like having a half a strong cup at 12 o'clock at night. Right. So get control of your caffeine. What all the professional athletes do is they go off caffeine for 2 or 3 days before the big game, and then boom.
Yeah.
There's no need to be taking crazy amounts of it. I've done the research on the science. 60 milligrams, one strong cup of coffee before the game. After 60 milligrams, the maximum dose is 200 milligrams. I've made drinks for guys with caffeine where, I would say 60 to 100 milligrams. After that, forget about it. The dose response curve, the impact won't be anyway more significant. So watch the caffeine, stop drinking energy drinks, get your hydration strategy right. Try things like glycerol. There are certain things that will help guys take on liquids better, but you don't want to be going out onto the pitch with water jiggling around your stomach. You don't. So you've ample time to get hydrated in the morning before, okay? You've ample time. And sip away. Now, the second part of your question was around...
refueling, I guess, after a late night training session or a game.
So what we must remember is after training, you've depleted energy systems in the body. If you look at ATP, the power. So that ATP is concerned with the first 0 to 3 seconds of explosiveness, right? So if you're training that, and you are as a getter, right? So, they will be lowered. Your glycogen levels in, obviously, your blood, in your muscles and your liver will be depleted to a certain level as well. So they need to be replenished. Now, when we exercise, we use that energy and then our muscles are primed. They're like sponges. They're primed to take it on. Okay? The normal advice for the normal person is don't eat 2 to 3 hours before bed. As a Gaelic player, I've worked with the top lads. That's not reasonable. You can't do that. Some of these lads are training up until 9 o'clock, 9:30, and then they're jumping in the shower. They're doing a cold plunge. They're getting a rub down. maybe it's 10 o'clock before they're getting home and they're going to bed at 11. That, you know, now if you're not eating, that's going to have a bigger impact, right? A much bigger impact. So my advice is, and this goes against the sleep expert advice, but my advice coming from both sides is you need to eat. Now, your protein shake, your whey protein shake won't build any muscle when you drink it after. It will stop your muscles breaking down. Okay, it will stop the catabolic effect that happens, the muscle damage. It will stop that. But what you need to do in order to facilitate the healing is you need to have carbohydrates. Because unless there's IGF-1 in your bloodstream, no protein synthesis is going to happen. Okay, no protein synthesis. You're not going to do anything. Okay, so you need carbohydrates. The carbohydrates will be sucked into the muscle as glucose and glycogen. Okay, that has to happen. So 3-to-1 carbohydrate to protein. Take it on. Your body will soak it up. If you're a young guy and you're training hard and all that, you won't have any problem. Okay, your digestive system has its own circadian rhythm, meaning its own 24-hour rhythm. Circadian, that's what that word means. Your gut bacteria, while you sleep, clean up your digestive system and help you absorb and utilize vitamins and minerals. Now, if you want the ideal scenario, I would say, you know, have your carbohydrates and protein. Maybe you could have a protein shake, but that's not really going to be used to build muscle, to be honest. The casein protein, the slow release protein, 3 or 4 hours before sleep time, that's the one, because those amino acids are going to be hitting the bloodstream. Absorption rate's 6 hours, you know, so they're going to be hitting the bloodstream at the same time as the growth hormone. And boom, all of a sudden, you've got the building blocks at the exact right time.
Okay. Yeah. So carbs then are the key really to get in post-training.
Yeah, carbs and protein, about 3-to-1 ratio. But like, I mean, this is where guys need to be prepped. Guys need to be, I think, this has been studied within the GAA. I think about 70% of GAA players are running out of fuel because they haven't loaded up enough carbohydrate prior to the game.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. One area I'd imagine a lot of players, and whether it's professional or amateur, I bet this is one of the most kind of frequent topics you're asked about, but we've heard about the relationship between alcohol and sleep. Like, I would say 99% of players after a big game, they're going to go out and have a few points after, no matter who they are, no matter what level they're at. Is there a massive difference between having 3 or 4 pints and leaving it at that versus having a big night out? And then is there anything that you would advise players to do if they are drinking that will sort of, I guess, not even help the recovery, but mitigate the effects of alcohol on their sleep? What's kind of best practice, or what would you advise athletes around alcohol and sleep?
Drink early. Okay. Alcohol impairs sleep in a few different ways. Lads go out and have a beer, no problem at all, or whatever. You know, it's not about, you know, it's not a professional sport, and even if it was, maybe, you know, it's fine. Now, when I hear lads saying like, oh, geez, should I play better after a few pints, you know? I play better when I'm hungover. You know, I just think, oh my God, like, you haven't a clue, do you? And something that you mentioned earlier on, which I forgot to mention, self-reporting with sleep. Self-reporting is only 60% accurate. 60% accurate, right? The devices you're wearing are around the same 60%. So it's not accurate at all. So how you feel you slept. So the same with alcohol. Same with this thing about, like, you know, oh, I actually play better with a hangover. Well, let's measure all your output, and I guarantee you it's not the case. So sleep stops you going as deep in deep sleep. And also sleep interferes with REM sleep. And REM sleep is where all of the neural networks are built. Okay, so all of the different things that you've been learning, the strategies and all that, and your ability to recall your mental faculties, your reaction times, your judgment, all of those things will be impacted because of alcohol. Now, you eliminate 1 unit per hour out of the body. Like, if you have drinks earlier and you stop earlier, then you're giving your body a chance to process out that alcohol. So that's what I would say. Like, not to be 100%, you know, like obviously before a big game. Now, look, I knew another guy and he used to have a glass of red wine or two glasses before big before the night before to just kind of, and I wouldn't advise people do that. Like, I think this guy he was a senior county player. Like, he was disciplined and everything else, but he said, it just helps to relax me before, before the big game. Maybe it switched his head off. Because what alcohol does essentially is switches off the prefrontal cortex. And that's the thinking, the planning part of your brain. But then you lose all you just go, do what you want, That's why guys get into trouble. But yeah, so just be mindful of alcohol and don't use it to switch off. Don't use alcohol. Dependency is a huge issue. So be careful.
And yeah, there's just a whole kind of different. You could go down a rabbit hole in terms of GAA and players abstaining for long periods of time and then going back on it, and like you said, to switch off, whatever. I have two more topics I want to touch on, and then just a couple of quick fire questions to kind of finish up, because I am conscious of your time. One of them is around naps, and I play football with a player who is I don't know, talented at naps, or brilliant at his ability to actually be able to nap during the day, and maybe once he finishes work he can have a nap before, and he would rave about the benefits of that. Is there kind of, what's best practice around that? I've heard different arguments around, say, 20 minutes versus 90 minutes because of sleep cycles. If you have a bad night's sleep, is it a good idea to have a nap before a game? What would you advise athletes around naps, and maybe the questions or the common questions they would kind of come to you with?
So how sleep architecture works is you sleep in 90-minute cycles. You go from stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Stage 3 is the deepest part of your sleep. And then you dream, REM sleep is the last part. And then that's one 90-minute cycle. For most of it, it's approximately 90 minutes. So if you're going to nap, the thing is you either nap for less than half an hour or full 90 minutes. Okay? A lot of different things happen with the nap. Now, NASA have researched this, and they've said 26 minutes is the absolute sweet spot for a nap, right? I don't know how in the hell you're going to measure that if you could switch off and measure 26 minutes. But look, I would say to you, naps are beneficial. Again, it's a place where I feel like guys are missing out, because I was on that bus, on the senior county bus, many, many times. And there was many times where the journey was 2 hours plus. And for me, if it was up to me, I would be putting all those lads asleep for 90 minutes. And I'd be leaving in some falling asleep time as well. Because the benefit is huge. Your reaction time is going to be better. You're going to be, faster. There's absolutely measurable benefit from naps. So if you can nap, and this is something, okay, you said the guy was talented at it, but I wonder, did he practice that? Because the US military train all their new recruits on how to fall asleep quickly. They put 20 million into this. Yeah. They train all the new.
How do you train? How do you train that?
Because here's the thing. We have to stop viewing it as I'm a victim of my own mind and I cannot do this. We have to get into that mindset of, I am going to train my mind to nap. Because from a physical standpoint, I can measure your melatonin levels and your adenosine levels and understand your sleep physiology exceptionally well. So physically, there's no reason why you can't sleep. You could have low melatonin. Maybe that's one thing. Maybe that would be a physiological measure. But when people say to me, I just can't sleep, well, you're reinforcing that by saying it. And also, it's the mindset of someone who doesn't want to train their mind, if you ask me. Now, you can train your mind. And how you train it is you train it to relax as much as possible. So you move things out of the way. Now, in meditation, it's the same brainwave as sleep. So one of the things that happens with sleep, so there's the chemical aspect of melatonin and adenosine, the sleep pressure that put you to sleep. Okay. There's a social element. There's a psychological element. And then there's a neurological, and the neurological element is the brainwave signature. My brain, your brain right now are in beta. We're high functioning. If I sit here after a while, start looking out that window and start daydreaming, that's alpha. My brain switches down into alpha. And then to achieve stage 1 sleep, something called alpha blocks happen. Right. And then I go into a different brainwave signature for sleep, theta, etc. Right. So you can train your mind. If you say you can't even, okay, I can't sleep, but I'm going to be as relaxed as possible, and I'm going to let go of tension, and I'm going to imagine the stress and tension in my body, and you work your way up. Now, I said this to a guy in a group, and he said, I tried that, it didn't work. I said, how many times did you try it? And he said, once. I said, would you go to the gym once and say, geez, that didn't work? Try that. Football, no good. I'm no good at it. You do it. How is it that you get in that training pitch and you practice free kicks for hours and weeks and years, right? And then you go, oh, I can't train my mind. I mean, you can. You absolutely can. And I'm telling you what, the good guys do. Like, this is why I love working with elite athletes. You tell them something, they do it. You tell them to repeat it every night for 6, they do it. They're not going, oh, just I don't know if I can do that now. That doesn't feel great. So how you do it is by failing repeatedly over months of doing it. And then guess what? You can do it. So I'm a big fan of naps, absolutely.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think the more I talk to you, the more I kind of understand how important you can actually train this. And it's not just something that I'm a bad sleeper or I'm bad at this, but you actually, it's about training the mind and that, which I wouldn't have really thought about before. But I think that's really interesting. The other kind of major topic, and we'll jump onto a few quicker ones then, is around, like, look, phone use is massive, and particularly among the younger generation. I'd imagine a lot of the advice is around keeping the phone outside the bedroom, and that's a very hard thing for players to do. Is there anything, like, we've heard about the effect that blue light has on your sleep? What would you advise around players to kind of minimize the damage around that?
It's a really good question. And I would say it's the commonality across. I've worked with such a diverse group of people, and every one of them was like, well, at night time, I hate to admit it, like, but I scroll. Now, that's disassociation. That's the untrained mind. Now, it's not your fault, because it's been powered by the most powerful reward pathway in human evolution. The same drive that you have for money, for sex, for winning that game, for glory, for all that stuff is dopamine, and your phone it works off the same pathway. Okay, so let's look at how we can kind of get off it. Now, the first thing to say again, blue light, it's a myth. It's a bit of a myth. Light is very powerful, yes. The head of neuroscience for Oxford University, Professor Russell Foster, I was on a panel with him in 2019. He says not the blue light, it's the activity on the phone. It's the alerting activity to the brain. You're secreting dopamine and cortisol in small amounts. It's the chemical equivalent of gambling to the brain, okay? So that's why it's so addictive. Now, it's the activity. So first, you can bring your phone into the bedroom, right? You can do that. Plan your sleep out in blocks of 90 minutes. If I need 7.5 hours and I have to be up at 6, that means I should be asleep at 10:30, which means I should be in bed at 10 because it takes me half an hour to fall asleep, which means that I set an alarm to get off social media at 9 o'clock. So set an alarm. I call it the reverse snooze button. It'll save you snoozing in the morning. Now, you can bring your phone into the bedroom and you can listen. You can listen, because listening to the brain is very different. Now, I mentioned the brain signature, the frequencies of alpha and theta and beta and so on. You cannot fall asleep while there's input in the visual cortex. You can't. That's why the eyes close and then you bang, you're gone, right? So while you're looking at a screen, you will not fall asleep. Okay? It's not relaxing. You don't feel relaxed after 2 hours on TikTok. Don't tell me you do, because you're exhausted and you're glitching. You can't get off it, right? So listen to a podcast. Listen to my podcast. Listen to this podcast. Listen to something. Listening is like chewing gum for the brain. Train yourself. Visualization. All of that works. Okay, you must give your brain something just slightly interesting enough that it listens to it, but not deeply interesting that, but certainly the scrolling is and stop saying you can't do it. You can. Just set that alarm and fail and try again, and you will.
The final part of this, I just want to run through a few sort of random questions that players have sent in, but also that I've kind of come up with myself. But if you can answer this in a sentence, now it doesn't have to be great detail, and some of them might be hard to answer in a sentence, but I just want to get your thoughts on a few things while we can kind of jump around. So the first one is around how important are the basics, say wearing sleep masks, blackout curtains, cold room, no noise. How important is that to your sleep? So next one, if I am someone who I'll set an alarm 15, 20 minutes before I need to get up, and I'll hit that snooze button a few times. Or maybe I'm someone who just will snooze it once or twice. How much damage is that?
It's important that you develop your routine. It is important. It helps. The eye mask helps shut the world out. It's like I'm shutting the world out. I tell you what, eye mask is really powerful in the summer. It'll keep you asleep for longer. It's the cheapest, most effective first thing to do. So yeah, big fan of the eye mask. And the other things, don't make your routine too complex, but build out a routine to help you decompress. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Well, if you're once or twice is fine. I'm not going to give you a hard time for 15 minutes. It's the guys who are doing it for an hour. If they went to bed half an hour earlier and got up, they've just gained a sleep cycle. So stop messing around. 10, 15 minutes, no problem.
Okay, interesting. If I'm someone who wakes up in the middle of the night to pee, is that a bad thing? Is that just something that happens naturally?
It will as you age, my friend. It will as you age. It will happen naturally as you age. You tend to wake up at the end of a sleep cycle. You can pop in. I'll give you a good tip. Sounds ridiculous, but works, right? One eye open. It'll stop you. It'll stop the light going in and waking you up more. Okay. But you can go in, pee, come back, and fall right back asleep again. Boom. You can train yourself. So I'm not worried about people going to the bathroom unless it's 3 or 4 times or 5 times.
Second last one, what's a common myth or misconception? And we might have touched on it already, but when people think about sleep, especially from an athlete point of view, is there anything in particular that you're like, that is a myth, that has no impact?
The biggest thing is that deep sleep is the most important. It's massively important, but guess what? Light sleep is exactly the same level of importance. Light sleep and deep sleep are equally important. Your brain will regulate how much you need of each, right? So that's one of the biggest, deep sleep. And I even heard people saying that deep sleep happens in REM sleep, which is complete nonsense. It's light's different, completely different. So stop trying to increase your deep sleep. Your brain regulates that. Focus on process, and it'll look after the rest. Light sleep is really important. Yeah.
Final one then, if I'm a GA player who I struggle with my sleep, what's one small action I can take that will, from tonight, help me improve my sleep?
Engage with nature as much as possible and stop relying on pills and supplements, because if you have you can do a full reset. Get up, get outside, get digging in that garden, and don't come in no matter what the weather. Come in for lunch, eat, go back outside, and come in at 7 or 8 o'clock. Go in and have a hot shower, have a good meal. You'll have no problem sleeping. Okay, you can reset the system and you can retrain. The most important thing to retrain is the narrative. Okay, I might have come across harsh or strong this evening, but like, I'm such a believer that we can take control of our own destiny with sleep, and don't become obsessive about it, because it will look after itself. Learn to unwind, learn to get off the device, and your sleep, wow, there'll be serious gains to be made.
Yeah, that was brilliant, Tom. I think personally, there's so much misconceptions out there, or there's so much information on social media in particular, and I think you've debunked a lot of things there. Yeah. I think you've really simplified it for people, and certainly for me, like I mentioned earlier on, that it's not just something that I'm a bad sleeper or I'm a good sleeper. You can actually work on it, and a big part of it is actually training the mind, which I think, I would imagine that's almost the biggest thing that people are going to take from this conversation.
Yeah, hopefully they will. Like, I mean, don't get obsessive about stuff. Like, I mean, try and get in control of your boundaries, and like, the sleep will come. Like, I actually don't fix anyone's sleep. I fix their lifestyle. I fix their boundaries. That's what I do. And guess what? The sleep always comes. It will. But not. We get into this very narrow last night and tonight window. Whereas we need to zoom out and give it 6, 8 weeks, 3 months. And guess what? Boom. Serious results.
I'll link your details in the show notes of the episode. If people want to contact you or work with you, is Instagram the best place to get you, or where would you send them to?
Yeah, sure. Instagram, tomcoleman.ie on Instagram. You can email me, tomasjcoleman@gmail.com, but Instagram is probably best. I will get back to you if you have questions. Like, I will send voice notes. And I will get back to you. I do sometimes have some capacity, but it is limited. So yeah, but look, I think the future for GAA, you're going to see people like me working with teams like Dublin or hopefully Mayo. You never know. Although I did work with Kevin McStay and I really work with other lovely people. But anyway, look, we'll see what the future holds.
Yeah, and it could be the 1% that eventually gets them over the line. But yeah, listen, thanks for coming on, Tom.
My
As I
pleasure.
said, so interesting, and I got so much from that. So thanks very much, and best of luck with everything down the line.
All right, Kevin. Take care.